Hello and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman.
This week on Heroic Media, the recent March for Life in Washington reveals the changing face of the pro-life movement.
The California Supreme Court bans membership to the Boy Scouts of America for all California judges.
Lawmakers in California push a death with dignity measure.
Stay tuned for all these stories and more here at Heroic Media. So here at Heroic Media, we discuss news headlines that deal with family, marriage, and life. And we focus on those issues because they're really foundational moral issues that are fundamental to our society.
That's right, and a lot of times we'll cover topics like abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and homosexual marriage.
Exactly.
So what's our first story?
Thanks, Patrick. First for today, Democrats, feminists, and atheists. These are some of the members of a new pro-life coalition that wants to spread the message of life to a broader audience.
Oh, there's no such thing as a pro-life Democrat, is there? I'm just joking. It's great. This is awesome, right? Because people have all these stereotypes about all these different types of people. And I mean, Democrats and atheists are a couple that kind of stand out in my mind, especially just in dealing with people, that I know in my life. So I think it's great that kind of this new movement, this new shift, and these new organizations that are springing up like Pro-Life Allies Coalition are focusing on, basically their mentality is that it's not going to just be a small group of Christians or Catholics or whatever, these small factions that are going to come and change America and everything, right? We need to get into all of these different groups of people, and there are people in those groups that do believe, that have a pro-life stance.
Absolutely.
And so it's kind of reaching out to them and kind of changing the face of pro-lifers.
Absolutely. I think it's really important. Amy Murphy of Life Matters Journal, she's part of forming this new coalition, and what she said is you could outlaw abortion with Republicans alone or Christians alone,
right,
but you couldn't create a culture of life without the support of every human being.
Exactly.
And that's key, because it's not just about making abortion illegal.
Right.
It's about it's really about ending abortion as a cultural thing, and there's a whole culture behind it, the whole shift in society that we're really going to have to bring about. And we do need help from everybody. We need atheists who are saying, I'm not doing this for religious reasons. I'm doing it because of the science behind it, the biology behind it. We need feminists who are saying, you know what, this is unfair to women because women are suffering from this, and because baby girls tend to be aborted at higher rates than baby boys in the womb. So we need all these different approaches. We need the Democrats saying, hey, wait a second, we're supposed to be the party of the poor. Who's more poor and vulnerable than the unborn child?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very good point. And I think that's a good approach, because laws are very important, obviously, and we should certainly try to get legislature in there that protects unborn children. But as we've even learned recently, you can't always count on your lawmakers, even when you think they're going to be pro-life. So I think it's really important to have that cultural change, because no matter what the laws are, if you change the culture and you change the people, then they won't have abortions, right? If they know the truth about these things. And so, like abortion. So I think that's a really smart move.
And I think some of these groups, too, are saying, hey, we've always been here, but we haven't been as recognized.
Yeah.
So let's have more dialogue. Let's have more discussion with sort of this conservative Christian Republican stereotype.
Yes.
And let's try to reach a broader audience. One of my favorite pro-life congressmen is named Dan Lipinski. He's a representative for Illinois. And he is a pro-life Democrat. And he is a very, very devout Catholic. And he really, you see him stand up to his party, and sometimes he's the only one doing it.
Yeah.
So he is absolutely willing to take those risks and to suffer for his Catholic and his pro-life beliefs. And the point that he made was that if we limit the pro-life movement to the Republican Party, it's going to hurt the pro-life movement and the Republican Party. Everyone loses.
Yes.
And the pro-life movement is able to be taken for granted if the Republicans assume that they get all those votes automatically.
Yeah.
And so he's saying, look, it's going to help everyone if we open this up and if we bring in more people. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. It's not about partisan politics.
Right.
It's about human life.
Yep, exactly. It should be a bipartisan issue.
Absolutely.
And that's really the key, is getting out there and I think that so much in politics and everything, it's in just when it comes to moral issues like this, we find that the verbiage is so convincing to some people. They just hear phrases or words like pro-choice and things like this, and then they go, "Oh yeah, I'm that." And so it really is about. I know I was reading something. Somebody was commenting on this, and it was really about equality and equality of information. And so this was, I think, a student at like the Catholic University of America was commenting on this subject of the expanding pro-life, like what the face of it looks like. And I think that that's a huge key, is that education as well, because a lot of times it's just these flashy words or phrases, and people say, "Yep, I'm there," or "Yep, I'm there." But I think it's, obviously getting that education and educating especially women and people in these other types of groups that you might not suspect would be pro-life. I think that's really key, because that education and the facts, science, and things like that, we really have a lot of tools on our side, and we need to start using those.
And I think ultrasound technology is a huge, huge part of why we see some of these groups coming up, because you have people who are not religious or who are not Catholic or Christian in any sense, and they're saying, well, wait a second, my sister had a baby and I saw the ultrasound picture. That was a baby. I saw the baby cry and move.
Right.
And so there's the science behind it is really key, and that's one of the points that this group is making, is we have to appeal to science to reach a broader audience as well as our Christian faith. And we know that those two are not at odds. Those two are compatible. Faith and reason go together.
Absolutely.
JP2 describes them as the two wings that are on this bird that's bringing us up to heaven. And so we need to remember that faith and reason go together, so we're not afraid of science. We're not opposed to science.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. And I think the more that this type of knowledge and seeing, people can just see, it's like logic. They see the science, they see the testimonies. It's not religiously,
exactly. It doesn't have.
It's not associated with any type of religious thing. It's just very obvious that you're killing a human being, and the science and everything reveals it. And I think people will start to change a lot more, especially with the changing face of the pro-life movement.
Absolutely.
So. All right, in our next story, the California Supreme Court has outlawed membership in the Boy Scouts of America for California judges, citing discrimination as the reason. So this is, kind of interesting. There's a lot of little nuances to these types of decisions and things like that, and a lot of different opinions. What's your take on this whole thing? So I guess we should go into a little bit of the story.
Let's give some background.
So the California Supreme Court, as you know, the short intro says, is they've basically said, all right, if you're going to be a judge, you can't be associated with any type of group that has any sort of discrimination. And so California was one of 47 states that bans judges from joining discrimination groups, basically, and one of 22 states that includes ban on groups that discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. Okay, so it's not necessarily like California is the only one that has these types of policies or anything like that, but they just changed it, and they said, listen, you can't be associated with the Boy Scouts of America. They used to have an exception for nonprofit organizations and stuff like that, focused on children, and then they pulled that back, basically. They said, just joking, you can't.
Right. And if you have to go into a little bit of the history of the Boy Scouts here, what's happening is previously the Boy Scouts had this policies that said that they didn't allow any openly gay members or leaders. And then in 2013, they said, okay, we're going to allow openly gay members, but still no openly gay leaders. And that basically that you got one of two reactions. Either you had people saying that's horrible that they're allowing these gay members, or they're saying that's horrible that they're not allowing the gay leaders. And so I think amid all of the voices and all of the confusion, people were reasonably upset. And the church, I think in that period, was really giving some good guidance and some good nuance, which the church often does. There's really a very nuanced view on many things. And the church, basically the church's response from different scouting groups and different organizations was to say, okay, let's remember the dignity and the respect that's due to every human person, no matter what their sexual orientation. And let's also remember Catholic teaching on sexuality. And so basically the church lays out those principles, those two principles, and says it's up to us to figure out how to apply them prudently.
Right, yeah. And to me, I see there's certain things, certain scenarios, but it's very nuanced. And so I think basically what happens is it gets put under this big umbrella Boy Scouts hate homosexuals. And really,
Right.
especially amid allegations, much like the Catholic Church has gone through, and horrible things have happened where people in positions of trust have abused children. The Boy Scouts, I mean, you name any organization on the planet and they've gone through it, right? But I think they're just trying to protect people and trying to think logically about it.
And one of the statements that the Boy Scouts did make, they said, scouting is a youth program, and any sexual conduct, whether heterosexual or
Right.
homosexual, of youth, of scouting age is contrary to the virtues of scouting. And so
Yeah,
they're trying to make
exactly.
this distinction. And I think the thing that was perhaps missing in the initial announcement, and the thing that the church is always so careful to insert there, is the difference between the orientation, the desire, and the action. And so the
Yes.
church says, look, if you struggle with this desire, if this is something you experience,
Yeah.
we're not condemning you. We're not
Exactly.
saying that itself is sinful or that you're going to hell. The action is what we have a problem with it.
Yes.
The church is always very careful to distinguish between that. And sometimes other groups don't do quite as good of a job as distinguishing, but that's what's
Yes.
important here. And that's also, when we look at, is this being discriminatory? And in general, are Catholics discriminatory? Is the teaching discriminatory? You have to have that difference. You have to have that distinction in order to love the person and to accept the person while
Yes.
rejecting the sinful behavior.
Exactly, and I think that that's the key in any of these talks with anything related to homosexual people, is that those little types of nuances get left out, and that's what's really important. And who knows what's going to happen with this, but I think one of the fallouts is it's how far does this go?
Exactly.
And like one of the judges who didn't name himself commented on this and said, can a committed Roman Catholic who doesn't believe in divorce preside in a family law court? Right? So there's all these different scenarios. How far do you go? Like, does a judge basically not be able to belong in any type of group for anything if they're going to be ruling over these types of matters?
Right.
So,
It raises some very serious questions that
does.
society's going to have to look at.
Yep.
Absolutely.
all right.
Coming up after the break, we will talk with an expert on a growing push for assisted suicide.
Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Heroic Media. For our next story, less than 3 months after Brittany Maynard's assisted suicide, 9 California lawmakers have announced legislation that would allow doctors to prescribe medicine that would end the life of terminally ill patients.
So this is exactly what people were afraid of after Brittany Maynard very publicly committed suicide, ended her own life because she was suffering from terminal brain cancer.
Right.
So some very big questions being raised here. I had the opportunity to speak with Deacon Alan Rastrelli. He's a doctor and the medical director of Divine Mercy Supportive Care here in Denver.
Right.
Let's go ahead and take a look at what he says. Dr. Allen, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, I'm glad I could be here, Michelle. It's great to be with you again.
Excellent. When we're looking at Brittany Maynard, it appears that her death may have played a significant role in the formation of California's right to die legislation. Do you think that this is going to affect other states as well?
It has already. There's legislation pending in New York and right here in Colorado. Yesterday, a bill was proposed for a right to die. And so it has triggered many interests in bringing this law to many states.
So we see it spreading, sort of this idea of it. What is the Catholic response to this so-called death with dignity, this very idea? Dignity is a very Catholic term. How are Catholics to respond to this concept of assisted suicide as death with dignity?
Well, if you look at the Catechism, it has 2 definitions of euthanasia and suicide. And I'll just read briefly. It says, an action or omission which of itself causes the death of the handicapped, sick, or the dying. And so that applies to both suicide, assisted suicide, and euthanasia. And so the Catholic Church objects to this because it goes against the 5th commandment. But just even natural moral law, society law, it goes against those laws also. And they're trying to change that in order to accommodate what they call a death with dignity, a right to die, those types of commentary that they're trying to get across.
It seems like this is a difficult argument to make because we have people who are suffering very much, and just the idea of wanting to be compassionate to them, it seems like perhaps the compassionate thing to do would be to help them end their suffering. Why is that not quite correct?
Well, the other thing that the Church says, and even my medical profession in its ethics says, you don't kill the sufferer to relieve the suffering. And so the Church is trying to show that yes, people do suffer. It is a part of life, and we can do everything we need to, medically, emotionally, spiritually, to try to relieve people's sufferings. And so when people are suffering, that's one of the reasons why I went from anesthesia into palliative and hospice medicine, and that is because people were not having a relief of their suffering, and we were not treating them adequately to take care of that. And so when they say a right to die, if you think about it, that term, I don't know anyone that's been denied a death, because all of us are going to die. And so what we want to do in a dignified way is to show people that they have a strong purpose for the rest of their life, that they have meaning that they can bring to themselves, to God, and to their loved ones, all the way through to the natural death that we can journey through them, with them through. So it makes a big difference, I think, when you talk about death with dignity.
Absolutely. That's really the dignified thing to do, is to respect this human life no matter how long it lasts or when it does end up ending.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit about Divine Mercy Supportive Care? What's the idea behind hospice and palliative care if some of our viewers aren't familiar with it?
So that's where I feel like we bring true compassion in. When you look at the roots of the word compassion, it means with passion. And that means that rather than getting rid of the person that you're feeling sorry for, you don't want to see them suffer, you join with them in their journey so that you don't abandon them and say, you have no value to me, or it's too hard for me to see you suffer. That's when the human experience really comes into play, spiritually, like I said, emotionally and physically, to bring true compassion. So hospice and palliative medicine reaches out to people with a terminal illness that may be causing a lot of distress, a lot of suffering, not only for the patient but for the family. And you bring them all together so that all kinds of healing can go on, not just of the disease, since we can't cure it anymore in a terminal illness. We still can heal by taking care of people all the way through the end of their life and show that they have value.
So it sounds like there is a lot of value for the patient at the end of their life, that time is valuable for them, for their family. There's a lot of good that can come from that.
I just had the experience of a patient whose family asked me to come and help talk with them and journey through with them to talk through the death of their father, their husband. And with all that, if we had ended his life sooner, because he was suffering, he was from a stroke, it would have ended up that his son, who had been away from the church, would not have come back to the church. He's come back to his faith as he journeyed with his dad in his brave journey through all the way through to his natural death, that helped bring him back. If you had curtailed that, if you had aborted the rest of his life, then he would have missed that opportunity. As well as I've seen multiple examples of reconciling with family, with siblings, with friends, and with God. And sometimes that's the best gift you can give somebody, so that as they do journey into their, what I call the heavenly birth, this life is like labor pains, that we can help them journey through that, the delivery into heavenly life.
Absolutely. It's a huge opportunity for grace. And I think it's interesting that you use the word aborted and heavenly birth, because in a way we talk a lot about abortion on this show. And in a way there is a connection between these life issues, because you're prematurely ending a life that had a purpose and that time had a value to it. So I think that's a very interesting connection.
Absolutely. As an anesthesiologist and helping women deliver babies with epidurals, I call our sacraments and our church and our faith the epidural to help you in that birth process through the labor pains of a natural death.
Interesting. Now, when we look at shaping the culture here, what can we do to try to help challenge the mainstream narrative and help show people the beauty and the dignity of what you're describing? How much of this is based on our cultural understanding of suffering, or what else can we do to sort of help shape our culture?
Well, certainly everybody naturally avoids suffering if they can. And the church is right along with that you do what you can to relieve suffering. But just as Jesus in the garden asked his Father to take this cross from me if it be your will, but if it's not your will, then give me the strength and the courage to endure the cross. And what was his cross for, this suffering? It was for the salvation, the redemption of mankind. And so if we can see a purpose in that, we try to relieve suffering as much as we can. The church says use whatever medications you need and techniques to make sure that a person is comfortable all the way through to the end. You don't hasten their death. But you know that a person's going to suffer in one way or another in this lifetime. How can you turn that into a good? By pouring your suffering into the cup of Christ and offering that up on the cross with Him. That brings purpose, that brings love, that brings redemption to not just yourself, but to everybody around you. Absolutely. And so that's one way to try to reassure people that you will be taken care of. You will be dignified. You will be clean. You will be cared for in the best way we can medically as well as spiritually.
That's beautiful. I think that redemptive view of suffering makes all the difference.
It does.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
what
you
we're here
so
for.
much. Yes. Thank you for all the work that you do and all the work that your organization does. And thank you for being here on the show today.
Well, thank you.
Wow, that's a great conversation that you guys had. I really like that. Had a
really
lot of
deep stuff.
Yeah, deep stuff and things that I hadn't really thought of. I think that we really have to remember to pray for these people, for the lawmakers
Absolutely.
in Colorado and California now, and really just hope for the best. Hope
Absolutely.
and pray.
Very important.
Yeah.
We'll have one more story after the break. Welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Michelle Bauman.
And I'm Patrick Cordova.
In our final story for today, in the 21st century, slavery may seem like a thing of the past, but in the African country of Mauritania, slavery is very much a reality.
Wow. It's crazy to think about that, because when you think about slavery, for me, like growing up, you like learn about it. You might watch Roots or something like that. You watch these old movies and you're like, man, this is like, it seems like a thing of the past,
It does,
right? I mean, it's just hard to believe that slavery still exists in its truest form, right? Like now we have newer forms of sex, like sex slavery, different types of slavery. But slavery, like as you think of it in the quote unquote olden days, is alive and well in this country in Africa, right?
Exactly, and some of the statistics here are alarming. That
Yeah.
As of 2012, it was estimated that 10 to 20% of the people in Mauritania were slaves. That's
crazy.
A huge percentage, and they would become the last country in the world to abolish slavery.
Right.
Didn't abolish slavery until 1981. But even then, it wasn't a crime. And so they didn't actually make it a crime to own another human being until 2007.
Right.
So you had this period of time where it wasn't punished. They just said, oh, it's abolished. And even today, from what I understand, the government will deny that it exists. So if you ask the Mauritanian government, oh, there's no slaves, no such thing. But then anyone who goes in there and starts looking around, and the UN, everybody finds that actually 1 in 10 to 1 in 5 people are actually living as slaves. They are owned by another person.
That's just crazy to me. It's just insane. And yeah, like you said, in 2007, it became officially, outlawed. But apparently there's only been one person that has been prosecuted for owning slaves since then. So it's still running rampant.
Absolutely.
And it's really, I mean, it'd be interesting to go over there to see how do these things keep on going, right? And to me, from what I've read and just like what I imagine, I guess, is that people are probably so isolated, the slaves are so isolated that from the rest of the world that they have no idea like what's going on. And it's been such a familial thing, I guess, like from generation to generation. If you were started as a slave, your great grandma started as a slave, then you are just in the line of slaves and don't know anything other than it. And it probably, and I know you've got an example, like it goes on both sides, not only from being enslaved, but also enslaving other people.
Exactly, and that's the part of the story that I found really fascinating was the one former slave owner. And he describes as a 7-year-old child being taken to pick out his slave, like picking a toy, his personal slave for the rest of his life. And then he said that later he read in a library book that men are born free and men are born and remain free and equal in rights. And that shocked him. He had never heard this idea before, that people are equal and that they deserve to be free. And so this really affected him, and he ended up giving up his slaves. But the idea that it's such a different culture, that idea had never been introduced to him before. And then you have many of the slaves, some of the slaves after being freed said they didn't know what it meant to be free. They didn't know how to live as a free person. So it's a totally different mind shift. It's a different mindset that needs to completely shift if slavery is actually going to be eradicated there.
Yeah, that's a very good point too, is that what do you do once you get out of it, when you break out of it?
If that's all you know.
If that's all you know, that's all you've been like a part of, you're probably not very well educated, and there's lots of issues, I'm sure, with that. So it's a big systemic problem, starting from the government and everybody up top that's corrupt and hiding all this and saying, oh yeah, we're good to go, all the way down to the people involved that, you know, how do you get them to integrate back into society and everything.
Right, and awareness is the first big step of it, so it's good that there are articles coming out that people are becoming more and more aware, hopefully.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you.
Please feel free to write to us with any comments, questions, or news tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please visit our website at heroicmedianews.org, where you can check out more stories like the ones we discussed on this episode.
That's it for this week. Until next time, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.